Happy, it all sounds so confusing. So 1.5 degrees Celsius is the target we should be aiming for. What makes the Earth warm, as the panel has told us? What do we need to do differently in order to manage that temperature increase?
Well, good evening to everybody, of course. First and foremost, the most important thing is that we need to start to change the way in which we generate some of the things that we do. Majority of that is the energy that we use. Not only electricity, but also liquid fuels, and including as well making sure that we safeguard the areas of our environment that enable the Earth to, let me put it in a simple way, to breathe. Such as our forests. So what you tend to find is that in many countries, not in South Africa, luckily so, but because we don't have a large forest, is that in many forest countries, wherever there's a region of forest, you have a lot of logging, you have a lot of deforestation due to economic activity around maybe timber or the production or the creation of agricultural space. So what this IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report basically tells us is that in the process of developing and in the process of creating the necessary goods and services, we need to start to change that, because the things that we're using are creating adverse effects on the climate and on our environment.
It changes fundamentally how the world has been working, because when you talk about energy consumption, you're talking about the way people travel, not just on road, but also in the air. It affects just daily life for people the world over. So when we're saying that must change, what are the alternatives?
Well, the alternatives are many. The first alternative is making sure that the things that we're using are far more efficient. So what we have already seen, and especially in South Africa, is that there's been increasing standards around, let's say, the light bulbs that we use, or the cars that we drive, or even the types of power stations that we build. But now we've gone a step further, where we're saying, look, even the things that we're using, while they're efficient, they're not necessarily matching up to the required reductions that are necessary for us to stop it to go to 1.5 or to 2 degrees. So we need to use alternative forms, which is renewable energy for electricity, biofuels in certain circumstances for liquid fuels, but also it means that... But
on the issue of that efficiency, that's part of what has led the world to where it is today. And, we may have a conversation now around the kind of light bulbs that people need to use in order to save energy. Yet at the same time, we still have communities that have not had electricity installed. So how do we balance then that need to, I suppose, meet these global warming protocols that we're signatories to, and at the same time not hamper development, especially where it has not even occurred?
So we've got a catch-22. The first thing is, if we continue this way, whatever we've gained developmentally is going to be eroded, because the extreme weather events are just going to continue happening even more, and it's going to become more expensive just to try and keep us going. The second thing is that we already have had these protocols, we already have plans, we just need to implement them. And some of these plans need to be implemented at an accelerated pace, but somehow between developing the technical plans and then enforcing them, there's a disjuncture. But overall, although that is a social and a political issue, the science basically says that we don't have time.
And of course, not all players are equal in this particular battle, because you have those that are really the greatest emitters, and they tend to be the most non-compliant, and those at the bottom end of that emissions table, and they're certainly much more compliant than others. So when it comes to enforcement, if things changed there, if things were more punitive, let's say for the US, for China, would the world be at a better place?
Most probably, but we're not in that stage right now. There's two worlds we can live in. It's the world that we ought to live in and the world that we live in. And the science is telling us not the ought, the world that we can dream of. It's telling us the world that we live in right now, that things are getting really serious. We don't have all the luxuries of saying that developed countries must do something now and get into a punitive agreement or get into sanctions. What we have right now is that everybody needs to do something. And if you don't do anything, this is the problem, it's just going to get worse. And the little that we can do, which is stopping it to 1.5, and that's the minimum that we need to do, is that stop it to 1.5 is possible.
So what role can then we all play, very briefly, just tips for our viewers in terms of being more conscientized, even when, let's say, buying a light bulb to replace one at home? I
mean, that's the simplest way of looking at it, in terms of just making sure that when we buy something, we're much more conscious of it. But it's really about the grand things, the big things, the corporations, the governments, the more economies of scale. Those need to change. Even if our consumer demand and the way in which we buy stuff changes, if the companies and the governments which are supposed to regulate the whole space don't do what is necessary, it means that we're going to be stuck in a very bad situation where day zero is an everyday reality.
Well, certainly sounds like political will needs to be a bit stronger, but of course we can only push for that political will when we ourselves understand the issues better.
Yeah.
Happy Kambule, his senior political advisor at Greenpeace Africa.